Hello and welcome to the new season of the CaolánSRugby podcast. Across the course of the year, we're going to have match conversations. We're going to have interviews. We're going to talk some bigger picture stuff. But as I return from the break, we've decided to start with Ireland. A post-World Cup post-mortem is not really something I'd be interested in. So today, we're going to start in the first of a two-part series looking at the depth available in Ireland, an overview, a deep dive, whatever you want to call it. For those of you who are tuning in on podcast, you can also get this on YouTube for a more interactive experience. But if you choose to stick with the podcast audio form, I will have the whole thing listed out name by name. You won't really miss much. Just a quick note on the season ahead. We will be looking at, URC, Champions Cup, Six Nations in quite a bit of detail. But one thing I want to look at is the bigger picture conversation. So be it, the state of the game in terms of safety, in terms of deaths and money, in terms of TV, growing the game, international game, tier two, URC, whatever it is, Heineken Cup. It's something that interests me, and it is something I think would be quite interesting in general, is to get fans' perspective on proper issues as opposed to the same old voices that quite a lot of us would actually disagree with. This is probably an example of that. I'm going to go through depth chart. It's just me. It's just my own opinions. Could have brought on a panel to do this, but then it would get extremely messy. But feel free to weigh in on the conversation, be it on Twitter or in comment sections or wherever you like. I'll leave it the question on the Spotify app, for instance. If you're listening on YouTube, you can leave a comment. And I just want to move the podcast platform to a place that is more conversational, more bigger picture. Yeah, we'll talk about big URC games, big Six Nations games, but it's important to get both sides of things as well. And it's something that would excite me for the season ahead. Of course, you'll always catch me on the Red Army podcast as well for all things Munster on a weekly basis. But we will start with Ireland for this season. And the reason I wanted to do a depth chart piece was mainly because, it's something that gets brought up a lot, but it's something that interests people. It's something that people like to talk about. Today, I'll start with the forwards, and we'll do backs again, either end of this week or next week. And the reason that I want to do it is to get a conversation going, to where we stand as of right now type of conversation. And hopefully it is, something that you enjoy. So Ireland, of course, not succeeding in their goals at the World Cup, losing another quarter-final to New Zealand. The likes of Johnny Sexton has retired, Keith Earls has retired, but besides that, it is a largely similar squad. But what direction will we go in? Will there be new coaches coming in come next year? Will there be a slight change of shape in the coaching squad, or not coaching, the playing squad? That remains to be seen. The reason I think doing this now is a good idea is because you will get a lot of it around, you get murmurings, especially around December, about who's getting called up to Ireland squads. And then from there, you kind of have a fair idea. So to do it now, taking stock at the end of a World Cup where there's been a few URC games, not all, most of the mainstay players won't have played in them, but that in and of itself is okay because those are the guys that we're just going to put down as core players. Just to start things off on the pod, going to kind of have broken down into three tiers. So we're going to have our core players, our fringe players, and our youth prospect type players. As many players who are capped as possible, I want to try and get them in. So, even if it is only one or two caps, I'll try and get as many of them in as possible. And I want to keep this as a very fluid perspective. We've played, 4 or 5 games, the URC, post-World Cup, the internationals aren't back. There's loads of rugby to be played between now and Six Nations time. So this is absolutely not a Six Nations squad prediction. And we will start with the forwards today. And we will start with the front row. And I think front row is something that we're going to see a lot of question marks with Ireland. A large reason of that being just the fact that you look at, you know, you look at the age profiles of some players, you look at the fact that a lot of our fringe players or younger players we're not too sure about. And loosehead prop is a good example of this because we've heard about, could Andrew Porter move back to Tighthead, for instance? What's our depth like after Keane Healy and so on. And so just to start things off, I've listed three core players, and I think it's fair to say, because they've been in basically every squad when fit. That's Andrew Porter, Keane Healy, and Dave Kilcoyne. Now, the standout there is the fact that, obviously Porter switched over from Tighthead to loosehead, and I think he's doing a good job there. Healy and Kilcoyne, definitely the wrong side of 30, and pushing on, I think you can say. And that's where the question marks lie, is can Ireland find suitable depth? Two players is really all you need to back up Andrew Porter if he stays at loosehead prop. And always, we'll always go straight to the younger players. But in the fringes, I have, two players from Munster, two from Leinster, two from Ulster, one from Connacht. I think so. Got Jeremy Luckman. He obviously went to the World Cup, so I think it's fair to say he is next man up, if you will. Michael Milne, Eric O'Sullivan, who I think is a good scrummager, and if he gets a full season, injury free, I think he's going to be right there. Josh Wycherley, I think those two are pretty much neck and neck. Andrew Warwick, the definition of just a good scrummager, and there's always a place for that. Ed Byrne, he was previously capped by Ireland as late as 2021, I'm going to say, and Peter Dooley, who has received one or two squad call-ups as well. And from there, no one is really jumping out as being, an obvious player to back up Porter. Luckman probably seems like the one, but, Josh Wycherley gets a lot of minutes for Munster. Is he international quality or size? We don't know. Michael Milne, hasn't really played too many big games for Leinster, so we don't know where he's at. Warwick and O'Sullivan, neither of those have nailed down the starting jersey. I left out Dennis Buckley on this because I think his kind of window has passed. He's never been in an Ireland squad under Andy Farrell or under any coaching staff, really. That's why I went with Peter Dooley. But Buckley and Dooley are kind of in that same mold. Even Duggan, good players. I think Dooley is probably the one that they see the most stock in because he's been in the squad previously. But again, it's about what do Ireland actually want from their players. In terms of, is it scrummaging? Is it more ball carrying and ball play work? Is it, around the field, going 70 minutes? Like the fact we have Andrew Porter, who had scrummaging question marks, as our main guy and never wavered for that because he's that good, probably suggests, yeah, maybe it's scrummaging isn't the biggest thing for Ireland. Maybe they're okay with that. I think Jeremy Luckman probably fits into that mold then as well, ahead of maybe Josh Wycherley and Andrew Warwick, insofar as if scrummaging isn't the number one thing that we're looking at, then, we could go for someone who's a little bit more dynamic. I've only listed three young players on this one. Paddy McCarthy jumps out at, it looks like he's going to play loosehead prop. I've now realised I've left out Jack Boyle, who's a very obvious candidate. Has played quite a few games for Leinster this season. I think he started all four to start the season. Gone with Munster's George Haddon and Kieran Ryan as well. Haddon, very good at under 20 level. Ryan has got a couple of pro games already. I feel like they're very obvious players to put in. McCarthy and Boyle are probably the two that we're looking at long term. Boyle in particular is seen to have a very high ceiling. McCarthy brilliant at under 20 level, albeit kind of moving around Tighthead to loosehead. Looks like he'll stick at loosehead and we'll see. I'm not going to make a prediction, but, I think, again, to just run over Porter, Healy, Kilcoyne, Luckman, Milne, O'Sullivan, Wycherley, Warwick, Ed Byrne, Peter Dooley, and then Paddy McCarthy, Jack Boyle, George Haddon, and Kieran Ryan as the youth or the prospects that we have. Moving on to hooker, and again, it's kind of the case of a similar scenario. I think like there's more young players listed on this one and less fringe players. But again, you kind of have your three obvious guys, Sheehan, Keller, Herring. Whether Rob Herring is in the Ireland squad come February remains to be seen. it's very possible to phase him out for one of Stewart, Barron, or Tierney Martin. In my opinion, those three are the obvious ones. Sheehan and Kelleher goes out saying they're phenomenal. What Rob Herring brings is just that solidity. You're never going to have 4 out of 10 performances from Rob Herring. Just really, really good in terms of his throwing, in terms of his breakdown work. Ball carrying is strong and a leader. But will he still be in the squad come next year? We don't know. I would prefer if we had him in there. I'd actually prefer if we went for 4 hookers next time and try and get lads in camp. So even if it's Sheehan, Keller, Stuart Barron, or Tom Stewart and Jimmy Barron, or Dylan Tierney Martin, or Tom Stewart and Dylan Tierney Martin, whatever way we want to do it, I wouldn't mind seeing that. And that's not to say it, throw Herring aside, but if they are going to try and phase him away, and like you have to remember, he's probably the most different player of the 6 that I've mentioned. Sheehan, Keller, Barron, Tierney Martin, definitely more dynamic, and Tom Stewart, definitely more dynamic, definitely more robust. Not as good of throwers, despite being quite good. Not at Herring's level, I would say. So Sheehan, Keller, Herring, I think safe to say, as of right now, come January, it may look a little bit different. I've Tom Stewart as the leading guy of the fringe players, followed by Jeremy Barron, followed by Dean and Tierney Martin. That's kind of based on Tierney Martin's only after winning the starting gig at Connacht, and even at that, they don't have Dave Heffernan available. So I think that one is okay to go for it. They have Tyg McElroy, who's been doing well, but unless he signs a long-term contract, putting him on this list. Stewart for me is the heir apparent to Herring at Ulster. Is he the heir apparent at Ireland? I'm not 100% sure. I think he's a good player. This season will probably test him. I think last year, scoring 17 tries with that fantastic maul in front of him probably skewed our perception of him. Hopefully this year we get more of a look at it as his throwing, his scrummaging, his ball carrying, his tackling, his ruck work, everything. Jeremy Barron is probably, at this point in time, probably the closest to Herring. His throwing hasn't been great. Some of Munster's line-out schemes and calls are definitely too complicated. Probably the closest in it. Runs a lot of good trail lines. He's a good jackal threat. But the one I really want to look out for is Dylan Tierney Martin. Galway, man. I think he has this edge to go alongside a dynamism and just a high ceiling. And even saying high ceiling kind of feels condescending at times, but he looks like a player who could be in a green of Ireland in the next 12 to 18 months. He really does. He started the season so strong. You're hoping for no injuries and for good form and to beat the door down, to get in. Maybe by January he could be ahead of Jimmy Barron. We don't know. He could even get ahead of Tom Stewart. You don't know which way it's going to go. I've also included Dave Heffernan and Niall Scannell because they've previously been capped by Ireland, quite experienced. I don't see them getting back into squad, so I did want to include them, as I mentioned at the top of the show. And then the youth prospects, I think this is where you kind of stand up and you say there's some great options. So I've got John McKee, Ulsterman, who's now down at Leinster, Lee Barron, Gus McCarthy, Ireland under-20 captain, Scott Buckley and Owen de Butler I've added in there as well. Scott Buckley, I'm not 100% sold on as of yet, but we'll wait and see. De Butler is kind of in the same boat where we'll wait and see. We probably haven't seen enough of them to give a strong opinion as of right now. McKee, Barron, McCarthy, they're kind of the ones that people are going to stand up and take notice of them. I think John McKee's been really good for Leinster in the last year or so. Lee Barron is very highly thought of. The only thing I would say is with McKee and Barron and even Gus McCarthy, granted he's only 20, they haven't played a lot of big games, and really none of these youthful guys will have done so, but they're going to have to start playing big games, even if it means moving provinces for any of them, before you can really put them ahead of, Stewart, Barron, Tierney Martin. 3 of those are starters, and Stewart, even at that, Stewart is neck and neck with Rob Herring. So it's going to be very hard for these guys. And if Andy Farrell opens that door for development players, which he's done before in his squads, then great, fantastic. Then we could see maybe Gus McCarthy. I think he'd be the front runner. I don't think he'd go with John McKee or Lee Barron. I think he'd be Gus McCarthy. Great. Um, Going forward, like Sheehan and Keller are still very, very young. They have another World Cup, if not two, in them. Stewart the same, Tierney Martin the same, Jimmy Barron close to it, little bit older than those two. So it's a position that Ireland are really, really stacked in. And I tweeted about it the other day, like we've an embarrassment of riches at hooker. Tighthead prop then, it's probably a similar conversation to Lou said. We know what the top lads are like. Not so sure going down the list. Tyke Furlong, Finlay Bealham, Tom O'Toole. Basically been in almost every Ireland squad under Andy Farrell over the last 3 years, I think you can say. And I think they're the obvious ones. They're the obvious standout players to be top of the list. The fringe one is it was a bit difficult in some ways. So I've gone with Roman Salanoa as top because he's been in Ireland squads. John Ryan, I mean, he's dependable. He might be 34, 35 years of age, but he's very dependable. Then I've gone with Marty Moore, as you can see, who, when fit, good player for Ireland, played in that A game against New Zealand last year, played really well that day. Ollie Jagger, now I've put a star beside his name because he's not confirmed as coming back to Ireland as at the time of recording. But I think that's a safe place to put him, is behind, established guys like Moore and Ryan. He'd probably jump ahead of Salanoa for Munster this year. You would imagine if he goes to Munster, I should add. Not 100% sure on that as of yet, no confirmation yet. And I put him ahead of Jack Ainger, who is second fiddle to Finlay Bealham. His form has been predominantly good. A couple of Connacht fans say he's blown a little bit hot and cold, which is fair enough. They're watching him more intensely than I am as well. That has to be remembered. So in terms of what we have there, that's 8 players: Furlong, Bealham, O'Toole, Salanoa, Ryan, Moore, Jaeger, and Ainger. I think that's solid. I don't think it's great. We've seen Tyke Furlong regress in recent years. Is Finlay Bealham going to take the starting jersey off him? I don't think Ireland will do that, even if I think it's something that we could afford a bit of flux, I think is the right word. It's not experimentation. We know what Bealham is. It's not changing of the guard because we're not going to toss out Furlong just to mix and match. But I don't think we're going to do that unless Andy Farrell and his coaching staff decide to go for something different over the next 4 years and go for, okay, if it is 50-50, maybe we'll go the other side to what we used to, which they might do. I think with Tighthead, I wouldn't be surprised if, despite putting him fourth in the fringe, that Ollie Jaeger goes straight into the Ireland squad because he's someone the RFU have coached before. They obviously think he's a good fit schematically or whatever. Like, he's a tall prop. There mightn't be any harm when you've got Dan Sheehan being quite tall as well. But I'm not 100% sold as of right now. He was behind Ala Latoa at the Crusaders. He hasn't got into New Zealand. He hasn't got capped in New Zealand, despite the fact that their scrummaging was pretty poor in recent years, up until De Groot and Lomax came in, it must be said. So just that's a question mark. As much as it's an asterisk there because he's not confirmed, there's a question mark there as well. The youth players then, I think, Sam Elo has probably more caps than the rest of them combined. So I've got with Scott Wilson first, man of the hour at the moment after his brilliant performance off the bench against Munster. Then Sam Elo of Connacht, Rory Maguire, Temi Lasisi, and Ushi McGill. The latter at Connacht at the moment. Wilson just looked really strong against Munster. Now I've heard there was talk of him kind of struggling at AIL level a few weeks ago, and sometimes it's more got to do with who's beside you and behind you in the scrum. So much as anything, because Eric O'Sullivan did a great job on Friday night. So he just deserves to be there as of right now, because I think it's just reward. We haven't seen that sort of performance from any of the rest of them. Sam Elo has been, third choice solidly at Connacht for the last while. So I think he has to be up near the top. Rory Maguire only made his first appearance for Leinster this year. A lot of people are happy with his progress. Timmy Lasisi hasn't featured this year, has featured in recent years. And Oisin McKell, who hasn't featured for Connacht yet. How do I think we're fixed at front row? I think it's okay. I think the core positions in all three is decent. I think that's, yeah, I think it's very solid. It's when you get into the fringes that we have a couple of question marks about the step up to international level. But thankfully, I do believe with the URC, that step up is going to be smaller than what it was for guys who are playing, 15 league games a year. If we need to call upon them, if we do decide to call upon them. Into the second row now, and again, we have three core players who've been there for 4 or 5 years now in Tyke Byrne, James Ryan, and Ian Henderson. Now, I probably could have put a H beside Tyke Byrne's name because whether we see him move back into that 4-6 hybrid role going forward, I don't know. I think it's something we could look at, but we'll wait and see. But what really stands out for those watching on YouTube is the array of young players that we have. I've listed 7, I think it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is great podcasting, folks. 7 young players. We'll get to them in a minute. The fringe players is solid, like really, really solid. Joe McCarthy, obviously younger, but because he went to the World Cup, kind of have to include him there as being a step above. Kieran Treadwell, I mean, I'm a fan of Treadwell, especially in Ireland. I think he always does a good job. I've left out Alan O'Connor, who is ahead of Treadwell at Ulster, just because I don't see him being in the frame for Ireland. And I think that's fair to say. I've also left out Finney Wychley and Josh Murphy. Wychley is capped for Ireland, but you look at the young players coming through, it's hard to see how he gets back into the squad, or if he's of international quality. And Josh Murphy's taking a year out, so as much as I'm a fan of his, again, is that 4-6 hybrid, just can't really include him. So McCarthy and Treadwell. Then I've gone with Niall Murray and Ross Maloney. Both of those line-out technicians, really, really solid. Murray, very agile for a lad of his size. I'm really happy with his development with Connacht over the last couple of years. I do worry that Dewald Senegal and his loss from the coaching staff could hurt Murray, but hopefully not. Ross Maloney, I think he's thereabouts. He could easily walk into an Ireland camp if Ireland decide to, or if they have any injuries, especially with his experience. Joe Joyce, I put him in there, as is Oisin Dowling. 2 more powerful second row choices. Joyce has impressed me in his first few games with Connacht, and Dowling has teamed up well as being that power lock. I don't think he's the biggest, don't get me wrong, but he has impressed me when he's been in that role. And then the youths, and this is where you just stand back and you say, we have a lot of great options. So we got Edwin Adogbo, I think has to be top of the list. He's still only 20, 21 years of age. He's dominating at URC level, dominating collisions, carries strong, tackles strong, rucks ferociously. Thomas Ahern behind him. Thomas Ahern probably didn't have his best game against Ulster, but as a line-out caller, he's been doing well. He's in that kind of Jorge Stamen mold, that Tyke Byrne mold. He might be a little bit trimmer, even though he's filled out, but he's going to be so dynamic. He's going to be 10, 12 carries a game kind of guy who could win jackal turnovers and be making line breaks. I hope he fulfills his potential. He has had a couple of injuries, so I don't want to get too far ahead. I put Darren Murray next, along with Brian Deeney, 2 guys who are on the fringes with their provinces. I think it's a good spot to leave them, because I think Adogbo and Ahern, there's a good chance they'll step up more this year, especially if Munster look to move the Tyburn to 6. Murray, again, like his brother, just a kind of ferocious talent. Brian Deeney, I've been really happy with him as just a nuts and bolts second row player for Leinster. And then 3 guys who've been under 20 in recent years, and Conor Tiernig, Diarmuid Mangan, and Joe Hopes. Now, Mangan has played a bit at 6, so could put him down as the hybrid role as well. But Tiernig was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant on 20 level, I found. And Joe Hope's really, really good as well. He got his first Ulster cap a week or 2 ago. But again, even though Tyke Byrne, James Ryan, Ian Henderson are all over 30, you do have the likes of McCarthy, Dogbo, Ahern, O'Tiernig, Mangan, even or Niall Murray, who I skipped over. Really, really good options there, in my opinion. I think second row is safe. We've had slight issues with second rows in terms of, just balance and that, but I think we figured that out now. and I think it's a position Ireland are well stacked in. I've also never known an Irish squad not to be stacked at the flanker position. And as I look at it, I realize I have left out John Hodnett. Oh. Anyways, it's core players, I think, to start with are Peter O'Mahony, Josh van der Fleer, and Ryan Baird. Baird is listed as a hybrid player for very obvious reasons, because he is in that 4-6 hybrid. I think going forward, he might end up at flanker. We'll wait and see. For me, Peter O'Mahony was Ireland's best back rower at the World Cup. I know, shock horror, some people don't necessarily agree there. They say it's biased, but it's just my opinion. Josh van der Fleer has had a good 2 years, but feel like his World Cup wasn't fantastic. And Baird, again, another high ceiling, high potential player. Will he kick on and be what Ireland want him to be? I think he will. I think he definitely fit what Leinster want from him. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But in terms of Ireland, we'll wait and see, because there's a load of options. And as we look there, Cian Prendergast as a 6 or an 8, Nick Timoney as a 7 or an 8, David McCann 6 or 8. Can probably put in John Hodnett here. It's an out and out 7, but despite being an out and out 7, schematically he lines up in the 1 of the 1-3-3-1, so he holds the width for Munster when they play that shape, and that's more what the number 8s do for Ireland, especially when Jack Conan's on the field. So probably worth noting, and this was something that was mentioned on commentary in the Ulster-Munster game about McCann against Kendall, but they didn't play the same role. That's where you kind of have to, use the minutes of watching provinces to distinguish, despite the fact, just say it again, John Hodnett, probably someone who fits what Ireland do at number 8. So if you go for him at 8, maybe Josh van der Fleer has to play a slightly different role, or Ryan Baird maybe going forward, Cian Prendergast. So I then have Scott Penny, who I don't know if he's going to break into the international reckoning. He certainly needs to break into the Leinster squad, first of all. Alex Kendellen, really, really impressive player, in my opinion. I really like Alex Kendellen. I think he's one of the best talents that we have in the back row. English qualified as well, so we don't want to lose him. There's no exception there. Like, we definitely don't want to lose a player of his talent. Included Will Connors, has had a tough run of injuries, but he has been in Ireland squads. So he deserves at least a shout out. Harry Sheridan have gone with, again, with the H for hybrid. I think a big reason for that is he's a decent player. He's a decent player. He will progress. He had a very good first season at Ulster, I felt like. And if they stick with him at 6, I think he might be a little bit on the outside, but you don't know. Players can progress at different levels. And then I've gone with Conor Oliver, who I've always been a fan of. Probably a bit on the older side when you compare Kendellen, Hodnett, Penny, Prendergast, guys like that. He's probably, he's older than them. But I've always really liked Conor Oliver as a gnarly 7. The tough games is where he stands out, and there's always a place for that. The youth, I mean, there's very little we can say about the youth back rows in Ireland, because they've all been fantastic. Ruan Quinn, Ruben Crothers, Lorcan McLaughlin, James McNabney. I just kind of started running out of room here on this, so I kind of had to fit them in by hook or by crook. You look at Alex Soroka, Martin Maloney, Sean O'Brien, Oisin McCormack, even Jack O'Sullivan. Granted, he's more of an 8. Keane Hurley. I had trying to think of anyone. It's the Ray brothers, Sean Raffel, Greg Jones, all at Ulster, a bit older. Don't get me wrong. Like, there's loads of back row quality in Ireland. Quinn really impressed me at under 20 level. All 4 of these in particular really impressed me. Thought McNabney made for great balance when he was on the field. Crothers, really, really good in the Grand Slam reigning season. Same for Quinn. Like, at some stage, we're going to have to start asking the question, do we start moving some of these guys to centre or something, or into the second row if we have to? Sean Adogbo is another that I could put in there. He's training with Munster. He's a really good young player as well, has the raw tools. Younger brother of Edwin Adogbo. And there's definitely more options, but it's a position we're pretty much filled in. I think, we won't see Peter O'Mahony at the next World Cup. I think Cian Prendergast is kind of growing into that role as being the next Irish blindside, but they could go for Ryan Baird, as I mentioned. Like someone like Nick Timoney should, in my opinion, be closer to Josh van der Fleer. I feel like he's actually stalled in the last maybe year or two. Dave McCann is certainly someone who's putting his hand up now eventually. And then any of those young forward players, if they're in the squad, developmental or otherwise, you're very, very happy to see. And then moving on, love when you have technical difficulties, to number 8. And again, these players pick themselves. So if I've put in James McNabney twice here for those on YouTube. Apologies if I put him in at number 8 as well. I forgot to take him out. Caelan Doris, Jack Conan. Very obvious. Not really much else you can say. Caelan Doris, very, very good player. The only question mark I'd have is I'd like to see him, grow and have really big impacts in really big games for Ireland, because that hasn't been the case. Whereas Dan Sheehan, for instance, I feel like he's always had good games when Ireland are playing their toughest matches. Doris not as much, but still an amazing talent. Jack Conan, thought he had a really good World Cup quarter final. He came off the bench. I think he had a good Six Nations. I know people say, well, Doris at 6 and Conan at 8 doesn't work, but listen, you could find a way to make it work. You could move your scheme around to make it work in some regard. It might still, if they decide to go that way. Gavin Coombs, Max Deacon, and Paul Boyle are my 3 fringe players. I wasn't 100% sure with eligibility of someone like Sean Jensen, or I'm pretty sure Hurley Langton isn't Irish qualified, so I just left it at that. Coombs, for me, I think he's doing everything he was doing without the tries, and people are saying, is it as impressive? Still, nuts and bolts is getting better, scrummaging is getting better, especially considering he's been pushing up into the second row for some scrums. His ruck work has improved. I think his all-round work has improved. I think because when you get used to a player who has so many highlight reel moments, you do expect to see those highlight reel moments time and again. Max Deegan, also in the fringes. Like you're really not going to be picking 4 of these number 8s in an Ireland squad. So that's worth noting. Deegan doesn't have the versatility. He's really an out and out 6 or out and out 8. Can play a bit at 6, but we're covered there. I actually think none of those 3 get in. I think Ian Prendergast will be our 6, 8, option at the Six Nations. Paul Boyle I put in as well. If we get a good season from him in particular, we could see him push on. I think Connacht's best back row right now is Hurley, Langton, Oliver, and Prendergast, but Boyle could have something to say about that, and he could become very, very important for Connacht very soon. And in the youth options, I think there's, forget James McNabney's name at the bottom for those of you on YouTube. Brian Gleeson, James Culhane. You can't really say anything negative about those 2 guys in terms of their impact at under 20 level. Culhane was phenomenal. He was unbelievable as I think he was captain. I'm not 100% sure. At number 8, and Gleeson, he's played URC games, and both of them have played URC games and looked at the level already in a position where, it's not always easy to make the step up straight away, because you might be the most physical guy at under 20s. You won't be the most physical guy at URC. Gleeson and Culhane have kind of, is it Culhane or Culhane? Apologies if I'm getting that wrong. They are growing really sharply. Gleeson has another year at under 20 level. I do wonder, would we be better, keeping him away from the under 26 nations and maybe get him in the Munster squad, play against the Crusaders, play their URC games, get him playing alongside like Alex Kendall and John Hodnett, Gavin Coombs. Like, is that really a bad thing for him if he's in that sort of position next year compared to an under 26 nations where he's won a Grand Slam? He's dominated the under 20 stage. It's what they do in France. And yes, France have a greater player pool. But like, if we're seeing Ireland doing well at a Six Nations and Brian Gleeson, James Culhane, even Ruan Quinn maybe, I'll just go back to Diarmuid Mangan, Lorcan McLaughlin, Conor Tiernig. If these guys are playing well at URC in the middle of that, then that is good for them more so, I think, than a good under 26 nations. I know Gleeson is the only one eligible. Maybe we're on Quinn. I'm not 100% sure there. But I would be in favour of not having him in that squad. And Maybe that's controversial, maybe it's not. Just my own opinion on that one. It's something I would prefer to see. And I think this is a very deep Ireland squad in spots and not so deep in others. Number 8 is one where, like, I mean, if Gleeson and Callahan get in the squad in developmental roles, you couldn't argue because they've shown their prospects, they've shown their talent. But there is question marks. There's absolutely question marks. We talked about it with prop forward in particular. I think, this is a good Ireland squad. I think it's a deep Ireland squad. I think it's deeper than we've ever had, if I'm being honest. But it's tough sometimes to translate that. As Ireland know, the World Cup didn't go very well, but we'll wait and see. That's all I have time for today. That is the forwards done. Again, if you feel like you want to check in on Anthony, it will be live on YouTube. I'll leave the link in the description. If you're on YouTube, give me your comments. If you're on Spotify, give me your comments, which you can do as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back with the backs, ideally this week, but with storms and work and everything, it might be possible. It might be next week before I get to that. But I hope you enjoyed this depth chart deep dive. We will have more of that to come over the coming weeks, months, season. Bigger picture conversations. This will be your home for it, and a couple of interviews as well, hopefully. But for now, thank you very much for listening or for watching. And until next time, take it easy.